There is a psychological war happening right now in the comments sections of historical documentaries. Look at the comments on any World War II video. Half the world blindly accepts the Hollywood narrative, a sanitized story where the villains are cartoon monsters operating on pure, irrational evil. But the other half of the internet is falling into a much more dangerous trap. They realize the Allies lied about certain historical events, and they begin to believe that the Axis powers were simply misunderstood victims of propaganda. Today, we are putting an end to both illusions. We are conducting a forensic autopsy on 4 of the biggest Allied myths of the Second World War, examined through a cold, clinical lens, and the German perspective. I will warn you right now, this autopsy will offend everyone. If you drop off early, you will only hear what you want to hear, and you will miss the hardest truth. If you are a proud American or British patriot, Case File 4 will infuriate you. But if you are a historical extremist trying to rewrite history, Case File 1 will completely silence you. Let's open the files. Case File 4, the Eugenics Mirror. The Anglo-American educational system teaches a very comforting illusion, the idea that state-sponsored demographic regulation, known as eugenics, was a uniquely German phenomenon, invented out of nowhere in 1933. A forensic examination of state legislation proves this is a mathematical lie. Decades before the Third Reich drafted their racial hygiene laws, the United States was the global pioneer of selective human biology. In places like California, tens of thousands of citizens deemed physically or mentally undesirable were subjected to mandated clinical procedures. To be precise, over 60,000 Americans were legally sterilized under these state-run programs by the mid-20th century. Nearly a third of those operations occurred in California alone, disproportionately targeting Hispanic women, African Americans, and the impoverished. These programs were not hidden in the shadows. They were probably funded by elite American institutions and championed by leading Western scientists. Furthermore, when German lawyers sat down to draft the infamous 1935 Nuremberg Laws, which stripped Jewish citizens of their biological and legal rights, they did not invent the framework from scratch. They directly studied, imported, and adapted the segregation and anti-miscegenation statutes of the American 19th century regional statutes. They explicitly studied the racial integrity laws of 30 U.S. states that criminalized interracial marriage to construct their own biological hierarchy. The blueprint for legal discrimination was imported across the Atlantic. After 1945, the victorious Allies realized how closely their own biological policies mirrored the regime they had just destroyed. So, they systematically redacted their own history. They projected 100% of the guilt for the eugenics movement onto the defeated German state, effectively sanitizing their own past to maintain the illusion of absolute moral superiority. Case File 3, the Theological Vivisection. A fierce psychological war rages in the comments regarding religion. Were the leaders of the Third Reich devout Christians, or were they militant atheists bent on destroying the church? Both narratives are historical illusions. The state did not ban the church, it surgically altered it. It was an operation of theological vivisection known as positive Christianity. The regime understood that you cannot instantly erase centuries of religious programming from the human brain. Instead, they hijacked the spiritual infrastructure. They clinically excised the Old Testament, erased its geographical origins, and engineered a new, militant Aryan Messiah. This was not a religious awakening. It was state-mandated neurological manipulation. The goal was to synchronize the population's faith with the state's biological and military objectives. Clergymen who recognized this psychological hijacking and resisted were not debated in the public square. They were clinically removed from society and processed into internment facilities. Religion was permitted, but only as a controlled substance. Case File 2, the Mathematics of War. Now, let us address the most dangerous myth currently circulating among modern historical apologists. The claim that the regime was not truly racist, because the Waffen-SS recruited foreign volunteers from India, the Middle East, and Asia. To frame this as racial tolerance is an absolute insult to military mathematics. By 1943, The Eastern Front was consuming German biomass at a catastrophic rate. The state was running a severe, unsustainable biological deficit against the Soviet war machine. By late 1943, they had suffered well over 1.5 million casualties in the East alone. They were simply running out of available personnel. Drafting foreign legions was not an embrace of multiculturalism. It was a cold, pragmatic extraction of global resources. The High Command needed biological entities to hold rifles, man the trenches, and absorb the kinetic impact of Soviet artillery. These foreign volunteers were deployed as strategic buffer forces. Using secondary, foreign populations to absorb casualties and preserve your primary genetic stock is not tolerance. It is the ultimate, clinical manifestation of a racial hierarchy. It was the industrial consumption of human life. Case File 1: The Anatomy of Propaganda. Allied intelligence agencies and post-war media tolerated, and sometimes engineered bizarre, cartoonish myths. The rumors of soap manufactured from human fat, or the leadership suffering from missing reproductive organs. Why did they promote these cheap, comic book narratives? Because the psychological reality of the regime's true evil was too dry, too bureaucratic, and too terrifying for the general public to comprehend. The masses needed a screaming, irrational monster to fight. They did not want to explain the Generalplan Ost, the master plan for the East. The true horrors of the Second World War were not perpetrated by madmen foaming at the mouth. They were orchestrated by men with PhDs in agriculture and economics. Men in tailored suits, sitting in quiet offices, using slide rules to calculate the exact caloric deprivation required to biologically eliminate 30 million Slavic civilians. The quotas were clinically exact. The biological blueprints called for the physical removal or starvation of 85% of the Polish population, 65% of Ukrainians, and 75% of Belarusians. They needed to clear the biological ecosystem of Eastern Europe to plant wheat for their own population. It was demographic engineering through clinical starvation. The Allies lied because the truth, the banality of bureaucratic, administrative elimination, is far more horrifying than a Hollywood villain. Part 4: The Verdict. The Allies lied about eugenics to protect their own moral image. They lied about the enemy to simplify the war. But exposing the hypocrisy of the victors does not absolve the actions of the defeated. My forensic question to you is this: does the revelation of Allied hypocrisy and propaganda diminish the crimes of the Axis? Or does it simply prove that in a war for absolute biological survival, no nation possesses a moral high ground? I want to see your verdict in the comments below. If you want to examine how the system punished the men who drew these maps, click here for the autopsy of history's biggest lies explained by a German. I'll see you in the lab.